I have a project in here for loading weights and dimensions. Right now it's probably in this project here. Item, where is it? It's here. Item, weights and dimensions, upload. So I'm going to take that, move it into your project. Where's your R55? I don't have access to your project. Let me add myself. No, it's in this one here. New weights and dimensions, this one here. Okay, so I'm going to move it in here. Right now, there's a not authorized. What? It's because you're not authorized on this project, so I'm just going to add you for now. So the reason it didn't allow me to move it from here to here is because you're not an owner on this project. So it's saying you can't take stuff from this project.
Okay.
So I'm just going to add you as an owner. So we have because of our type of user that we're set up,
Yes.
we can just add ourselves to anybody's project. So it's
Yes.
kind of pointless. Normally not everybody has that capability, right? But I added myself or you to the project,
And then you can.
and now I can move. Okay, so this is R. So it's a batch application.
Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
so the way that this program is designed, I want to show you visually. Let's open up this one here. Let's bring this over here. There's a program that I built. It's on the menu. I don't know what its name. It's
You can log in with your account.
well, it's the same thing. We have the same.
Oh no, I thought that you have a shortcut.
No, no. Weights and measures upload. Okay, it's a program. This is like a common technique. Okay, for uploads or type of thing. This file right here.
1 second.
What do you want to do?
I want to add it
To what?
here.
Favorites. You have to add the task. This thing here.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thanks.
Okay. So, um, what instead of the program itself doing the upload, the program is all it's doing is accepting input and putting it into a temporary file. And then we launch a batch process, which is going to loop or read through the file and upload all the records. That's the way that I designed this application. So right now, when you do an add, it's expecting you to put the second item number, the unit of measure, the length, width, height, and weight. Okay. When you upload that, it doesn't upload it to JDE. It's not going to update the tables that we were just working on, F55, 41002, F41. It's not updating that. It's just putting it into a temporary file. What JDE usually calls those files Z1 files.
Okay.
So you upload to a Z1 file, and then there's a process that reads the data in that Z1 file and uploads it to the real areas in JDE. So that's the technique I use for this
Using business
application.
functions to upload?
No, I'm not. It's all just in my code in my do section. So that's what I'm modifying right now. I'm not modifying the application that writes to the temporary file because that stays the same. But now what I'm going to modify is the batch process.
Uh-huh.
Same thing that you did. Instead of writing to F41002,
Yeah.
I'm going to write to F55 41002.
Okay.
And I'm going to use the same logic that you did. If it's primary, put the weight and the measure and the volume
Yes.
in F41002. So why do I can't see my okay, there we go. So I'm gonna check that out and I'll go real quick overview of how a batch program works. Okay, they have their own events.
Perfect.
So instead of form design aid, it's report design aid.
Mhm.
These things, the batch process have are organized into sections. Okay, each section, this is a section.
Yes.
This is a very simple version of a UBE. Okay, each section has events that are tied to it. So the process when you run this job, what it's going to do is it's going to take the first section that is okay. It will take the first section and it'll process the events in the following order. Okay, initialize section. Same thing like when the form loads, you have
Yes.
initializing of the form.
Yes.
Well, this section is the first code that it runs for the section. So usually you initialize some variables.
Yes.
That's you like some global variables or some variables you're going to use within that section.
Yes.
You have some of these more advanced ones. I'm not going to go through right now,
Yes.
but the two that are very important or that you're going to use the most, initialize and do. Initialize runs once for that section. Do runs for every record in that section. What you do on a section is just like you tie a business view to a form, you tie a business view to a section. And that do will run for every record that it hits in that business view. So here, my business view that I've loaded is the Z. I called it a Z1, right? F55000 Z1. That's the temporary file that my application is writing to. Create a view on top of that temporary file. So the table is F55. The view is on top of that file, V55. And I assigned through here, select, where do I do that again? Section, select business view.
Mhm.
So when you create a new section, it, the default, it's not really scaffolding, but the default wizard will ask you what business view you want to tie this section to. And then again, this code initialize executes once. This code executes for every single record in there. Okay, so the bulk of your code usually is in the do section. On top of that, okay, you have what JDE calls data selection. Data selection is how do you want to filter that view. So, for example, some processes you don't want to run on all of the table. You want to run on like you want to have a where clause in there.
Yes.
That's where the data selection comes in. And you put data selection, you could put the data selection in code, and you can also soft code a bit of that data selection through versions. Okay, so just like a program, interactive application has an interactive version that has processing options,
Yeah. PO. Yes.
right? An application, a batch version, a UBE also has versions, and you can have processing options and data selection. on those versions. So you can say, run this version with this set of where clause, run this version with this set of where clause. If you program it in the application itself, it's more hard coded. You can soft code it a bit, but it's going to be tends to be more hard coded. So when you look at Ivy, it's the interactive versions. This is where you're gonna plug in an application name, and you're gonna see, for example, that's the one that you built. That's the different versions, and you have processing options that are different that tell that you've coded for.
Yes.
The exact same thing uh, is true for batch versions.
Okay.
So I have batch versions, and I'm gonna look up my application, and I'm gonna have processing options. This particular one has no processing options because I didn't need any. But if I wanted to run one version that does this path and one version that does this path, as long as I code for it, I'll be able to do the exact same thing. And again, the difference between a batch application and a program is interactive.
Yes.
The user interacts with it. A batch, it just runs and runs in the background.
It's like a service.
It's something like so you can schedule it. Normally you schedule it, or a user launches it. Okay. Um, so you see in the batch versions, not only do you have processing options, you have data selection. So when you run the thing, you can say, this is the data selection I want to use for my where clause. So when I submit this, I can say where I see every column in my table, right? And I could say where, I don't know, the item number is equal to 10002, for example,
Okay.
right? And so I'm only gonna that do in this case will only run for maybe one, maybe two records,
So
right?
this logic. Okay.
This is you're filtering what you're running the batch application on.
Okay. So you can put the logics into the version.
No, this
Yeah.
this is by default. You don't have to write any code to make this that happen. The
Yeah.
processing options you gotta respond to those processing options. You gotta code for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Data selection you don't have to code for.
But this data selection will belong to
This data
one
selection
version.
belongs to yes, that's right. This data selection belongs. You can change it on the fly,
Yeah.
or you can set it up for a version
Oh. Okay.
so that it's the default for that version.
Okay.
Okay. So my particular application has no data selection
Yes.
and it's got no processing options
Okay.
because it what my application is doing is you're writing to a temporary file, and then in that temporary file, it's just going to process everything in that temporary file. That's true to some extent. Okay. I've decided to program the data selection inside of the application itself.
Right.
So the way that I designed this program here is by user ID. Okay, is by user ID. So when I make an add here,
Yes.
it's gonna write this data to the table, okay, and it's gonna tag your user ID also in that table. So I'll give you an example. Normally, so this is a headerless detail form. Okay, this is what we're gonna go through next.
Yes.
Okay, normally you would have an Excel file, okay, and headerless detail is very very good for uploads because you can copy and paste from Excel. So as long as you know the format, right? Let's say each. So just for simplicity, that's all I need. Okay, so I can take that and I can just paste it. Do it again. Paste it in there. So if I had like 100 lines or whatever, I can just paste it. Right?
Okay.
When I save this, it saves it under your name.
Okay.
Okay? So when I upload the processed records, it's going to upload only the stuff that you've added to the table. So if 3 people are working on the same file, I'm not going to upload somebody else's work. I'm going to upload only the stuff you worked on. To accomplish that data selection, I put it in when you call a batch application, similar to a form has a data structure. So you can pass data to it. So you can look at the report data structure here.
Okay.
What I did is says, tell me the user ID. So you can pass me the user ID, and then what the batch application is going to do is going to filter on that user ID. Okay, and that's what I do here in the Initialize section. I say set the user ID equal to the user ID that's passed in.
Okay. Where do you define the user ID as the data structure that goes into the form, into the batch? Or
What? Say that again?
the data structure has one field, is user ID.
Yeah. What do you define it here? Report data structure. It's the same thing here.
So, but this one is created by default.
No.
It's not
No.
like the other one.
No.
It's not like the interactive. The interactive comes up with the primary key.
The primary key. I don't know if it comes up with I don't think it does.
So this
batch
one
versus
you have to add.
You add it yourself, yeah.
From where? Oh,
From here.
From the data dictionary.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect.
And you only have data dictionary. It's not no BC or anything like that. Only data
So
dictionary.
it doesn't think for you.
No.
Okay.
Okay, so you see here the variables in a data structure for a form is FI, form interconnect. The variables in a report are RI, report interconnect.
Yes.
Okay, so I set my global variable. Okay, because you can have. I'm not going to get into too much detail now. I'm setting basically a global variable here,
Yes.
and I'm passing the data that's passed in the report interconnect. So then I'm filtering based on that here. Okay, and I'm also hard coding the filtering. I don't delete the data after you're done with it. I just mark it as processed. So I'm making sure that you're processing only unprocessed records. So the job of this UBE is going to go through each record, do whatever it's got to do, and then mark it as processed. So the next time I run this, it's gonna only upload. It's gonna make sure that you only run on unprocessed records. If it's processed it before, I don't want to run it again on the same record.
UBE stands for
Universal Batch Engine.
Okay.
It's a batch application, a UBE, a report. It's all the same thing in JDE.
Okay. Report is the same thing as
Yes, because a batch application, you program stuff in batch, but it's also it's the what you use to have output report. So this
Can I have is it possible to have a batch without any output?
yes, you just don't put any output. You don't design the output. Yeah. But in this case here, I made my output very simple. What did you process? Right? So I'm writing some stuff to here, but I'm not going to get into batch applications right now too much. So in the do section, I can write some code. So in here, what I'm doing right now is I'm grabbing some data, okay? I want to display to the user the second item number. What gets written to the table is a short item number. So very similar to how you're doing a fetch single and you're putting it in a form control. Well, I'm putting it in a report variable, and the RV is what gets displayed. Okay, so I'm not going to get too much detail on that. We can. I'm also grabbing the unit of measure, the primary unit of measure. So now I know I have the primary unit of measure in that variable. Now I'm going to use that variable to do the ifs that you were doing before, right? So I'm already doing that if down here. So if it's the primary, I'm writing to that F554101E. Okay? And I know if it exists. I'm doing the same thing that you're doing, right? In the code, you're checking to see if it exists. If it exists, you're going to do an update. If it doesn't exist, you're going to do an insert. How do I know if it exists? Well, up here, one of the things I do is I fetch for the data. Do a select. Same thing that you're doing. Do a select. If it's successful, it exists. If it's not successful, it doesn't exist, and the default is it doesn't exist. Okay? So then down here, I'm able to do the same logic that you did in your program. If it exists, do an update. Otherwise, do an insert. And I didn't show you the updates and inserts, but it's very similar to a fetch single. It's the same kind of interface that you're seeing here. Hang on, where did it go here? Here. This you're doing a fetch single. Here's your where. That's what you're grabbing. Well, in here, that's your where.
Yes.
That's what you're inserting.
Okay. And this is the index.
That's it. You do your where on your index all the time. So that's actually a limitation that I'm going to explain later on. You don't have full control over your where clauses. It has to be an index for you to be able to do a where in the first place.
Okay.
There's workarounds for all that stuff, but there's limitations in the development environment in JDE, and one of those that's like a limitation that bugs the crap out of me, but we're stuck with it. Okay? So I can't say, for example, where this is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and this is equal to the short item number, insert a 5 here. There's limitations in the development framework. So same thing as an insert. An insert is the same thing. It's just that there's no where clause. You're just inserting. You're inserting data. Okay. So in this case, I'm just inserting those pieces of information and leave the rest default, which are blank. Okay. And I'm doing the same thing. This is a common thing you do in JDE. It's what you did in Solo Chain. Those are the audit fields that you see in a lot of tables. And we're going to update the audit. So who's the user who did the update? What's the program that did the update? What the date it was updated? What's the time it was updated? And what machine was he on when he updated?
You retrieve these ones from the system.
Yes, there's a business function to do that. Okay. So on Initialize, there's get audit information. It's a business function. I put all the relevant ones in a variable. So I'm just grabbing the date. The audit information gives me a username. Okay.
Okay, so you create one variable for each.
For each of them, yeah. For each of the audits. Okay. In this case, I could have grabbed the username here, but there's a special variable. Okay, called hang on, where is it? SL, where is it? Oh, I know what I'm doing. In this case here, the user ID that I'm using is the user ID passed in. I'm not relying on the audit information to say who's running this job. I'm gonna say who's the user passed in from the data structure. Normally, okay, this is actually an example that deviates from the norm. Normally, you're grabbing the first 4 from here. This function, get audit info, will get you the currently running the user who called that business function. It's going to get you the current date, the current time, and what machine they're processing on. And the program is hard coded. So the program is going to be R55 something. Okay, don't ask about the E right now. I'll get into that another time. The E in front. Okay, so in here,
it's like a legacy thing.
It's a legacy.
Yeah, I've heard it, but I don't understand it. Yeah.
Okay, so right now, what I'm doing is I'm inserting into F41002.
Okay.
Okay, and because of limitations, I'm deleting and inserting, deleting and inserting, deleting and inserting.
Okay.
Because I can't do an update nicely. Okay, in JDE. So I've decided to do a delete and an insert. A delete and an insert will work as long as you grab the data first. Okay, and I have hang on a second. Actually, this actually suffers from a little bit of a bug. There could be some potential data loss there. right? So I'm gonna scrap writing to F41002, but I do need to write the weight and the volume to F41002 if it's primary unit measure. So if the unit of measure, okay, and BC
Yeah.
on a do section
Yeah.
is referred to the currently processing record.
Okay.
So if the unit of measure of the current processing record is equal to the unit of measure primary, and I get the primary up here.
Yeah.
So I say the currently running record, I'm going to pass in the short item number of the currently processed record, and I'm going to grab the unit of measure and store it in a primary unit of measure stored in a variable.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have the short item number, the primary unit of measure that's stored in a variable, and I got the unit of measure that's being processed because that's in the BC.
Mm-hmm.
So now I can make a decision here. I can say if the unit of measure being processed is equal to the primary unit of measure of the item being processed,
Mm-hmm.
do this. So that part is writing the weight and the volume to F41002. So that's this table here, right? This do we still have it open? Where the hell is it? I don't know where it went, but the I don't know where it went. Anyway, this one here is writing the weight, the weight and the volume to the F41002 table.
Yeah.
This part over here is going to be updating um, the 55.
Yeah.
And then the last part to do is to change the stuff from writing to F41002 and instead write to F55 41002.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to scrap this, completely delete it. I don't need this anymore. No, sorry, I don't need that and that. I don't need this. Okay. And here I see some events. Still, I have event rules, right? And here's my variables. I don't need these anymore because I'm not writing DH anymore, DL anymore. So I'm going to remove those variables. Okay. And I'm going to update my code. So now this is going to be super simple because the table, the format of the temp table exactly matches the format of the table I'm writing to.
Yeah.
So the only thing I got to do here now is the same thing I'm doing here. Check to see if it exists. If it exists, update it. If it doesn't exist, insert it.
Mm-hmm.
So that I'll do over here. And um, what I normally do is I comment heavily in uh,
GD.
in JDE because it's not like C Sharp where it reads very English, right? You can't. It's not the same style of programming. So I usually have like things like this. I kind of write my English in my comments.
Instead
So
of the functions.
that's it. So I'll say here, I'll say, check if F40, check if um, item extension record exists here. I'm gonna just set up these are my variables I'm gonna work with. I'm gonna say Okay, so I kind of comment my code a lot in JDE. So the part that I'm missing now is to test to see if it exists. So to test to see if it exists, I'm going to fetch single based on the key of the table. So F5541 41002. That's my table. That's my key.
Yes.
So the item that I'm processing is going to have a short item number and a unit of measure because
Yes.
that's what I'm uploading.
Yes.
Okay, now I could do this. If it's successful, it exists. If it's not successful, it doesn't exist. So sometimes you see this happening. Write my update now statement. If it's successful, I'm going to do an update. Do an update. F5541002. And I'm going to pass in my where clause is going to be where my short item number is equal to the item being processed.
Yes.
Where the unit of measure is equal to the unit of measure being processed. That's my where. Everything else gets updated. So I'm going to update my length with the length being processed, the width with the width being processed, height, weight, volume. This here we're going to hard code for now.
Mhm.
Did you hard code it in the application? In your application? Do you know?
Now yes.
Okay, for now I'm just going to hard code it. So what we're going to need is some variables because I can't put in a number there without a variable. I have to map an update or an insert with with something, a variable. Could be a variable, could be one of those runtime variables as well, like BC and right. So I need a variable to store a constant in. So I'm just going to take the same as these. So I'm going to say LUM, VOM, and UWUM. So LUOM,
UOM.
LU, yeah, you know what? I already have something here. I have FC, LB, and I'm missing inches. So inches is going to be volume. So VUOM. VUOM. No, it's going to be LUOM. Unit measure linear. Mention. Mention. I'm going to rename these to unit of measure. FC is going to be volume. And unit of measure weight. So one thing you might notice is it won't change right away. When I close, reopen it, it'll change, or if I just double click and click OK,
Yeah, yeah.
it'll
It's
change, right?
consistent. Yeah, everything will change.
So I'm gonna add unit of measure dimension is inches. Okay, so now I can say in here, I can say the linear unit of measure is my dimensions, the volume is my volume, and the weight is my weight. I'm not touching oversized item. Maybe if I make oversized item part of the upload in the future,
Okay.
right? I could touch it, but right now it's not part of my upload. You need to use your application. It's going to be JDE will not write a null there. JDE will put a blank there, even if I don't
Okay.
pass anything.
I understand.
That's why I said JDE doesn't like nulls. Sometimes it's not that it doesn't like nulls. You can get away with nulls, but it can also cause problems. Nulls. I've had scenarios where they do
Okay, I
cause me
understand.
problems. So that's my update, and here I'm going to do the same thing but an insert instead. So my insert is going to look at F554102 and I'm going to write the same information, short item number, unit measure as input, length, width, height, weight, volume, my dimension, unit of measure, my volume, my weight, my audit information. Okay, so a lot of times you'll see something like this. Fetch, single. If it's successful, update. If it's not, insert. That's basically like your implementation of a save. Um, sometimes you can also sometimes this is dangerous because sometimes you need information from this table and you do some processing, but you want to do an update and insert later on down the line.
Okay.
Like here. I only want to do an insert and update, but I need information from this table.
Yeah.
So I do my fetch single here to get the information that I need, and I have a variable track whether it exists or not, rather than relying on an if co-success. Right? I test it because the co-success, okay, is only related to the previous fetch. So down here, I can't say if co-success because this ran, this ran, this ran, this ran.
Okay.
So I set a variable instead, right? Specifically designed to say, does this record exist?
To that fetch on that table.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I'm looking.
This applies the co-sex right to
any not only fetches but inserts, updates, deletes. The last one only.
Any and last one.
Yes.
Okay.
So sometimes you see that type of thing happening. Now to stay consistent in this application.
But you still if it.
You still if it down below. You if this. Yeah, yes. Here you have to if it. Yeah, you have to if it.
And you
assign the variable
that we're gonna use later on.
Exactly.
When you have to do
transformation. Yeah, because it maintains the state of that, like that variable. Exactly. This variable will change throughout the life. This one won't. It'll stay what it was, what I assigned it. So to stay consistent in this application, I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, there is no such thing as a boolean.
Yeah.
Okay, it's characters. 99.9% of the time, the character you're going to use, okay, for a boolean, that's just a random boolean you're doing for testing, is EV01. Okay. They call it, I don't know why it's called this, but it's called Everest Point 01. I don't know why they call it that, but it's just something that they have EV01, 02, 03.
It's in DI.
It's a data dictionary. Yeah. So I'm gonna add myself a variable EV01. See, they call it Everest Point 01, and it's a character field. So usually what you do is you use YN.
Yes.
Or 01.
Yeah.
This one I'm using Y and N.
Yeah.
So I'll be consistent.
Yeah, I like YN.
So F 55 41 0 41 002 exists. Okay. Now there's two different types of variables in a batch application. So when I add it, I can. So actually, there's three. Okay. The two that are mainly used are event and report. I'm not going to get into section for now. Event has scoped to the event. Okay. So I'm in the do section. So every single time this thing runs, it'll get reinitialized. Mm-hmm. So if I set this to a 1 right now, the next time it runs, it's not going to be a 1. In this case, because I'm setting it to a 1 here, at the very beginning of the do section, well, every do is going to reset it to a 1, right? But it's the EVT is event scoped to this event. I won't see it. This variable here, if I go to a different event, I won't even see it in my list. Okay. See, I only see RPT. Okay. RPT, well, you see RPT plus your EVTs specific for that event. In this case, I didn't define any event,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So in there, I'm gonna just copy this, paste it. I'm gonna say 41002 exists. No. And I'm gonna do this, just to be consistent. That's it. So that's the change that I'm gonna make to the application. It was just a quick overview of the batch applications, and it gives you a little bit of an idea of using, an update and an insert.
Mhm.
And you see that the logic that I'm doing is very different from like a C# program. It's very like procedural.
Yes.
You're kind of like limited. You're scoped to an event, right? So you're programming for in response to an event, but the response to an event is very procedural.
Yeah.
So that's why I like commenting a lot. So you're kind of like reading a link. So the first thing I'm doing, I'm check to see if it exists. You know, if the unit measure being processed equal to prime, do some special processing. Update F41002. Update. It gives kind of like somewhat of English to it.
Yeah.
Last thing I'm gonna do is just comment this out for now, because this project I want to move straight to production and deploy it to production, and that is the WMS business function that I created. That's not deployed to production. So if I deploy that to production without deploying that to production, when it gets to that code, it's gonna fail. It's gonna crash. So I saved that event, save that. On next week, I'm gonna test that. I'm not gonna deploy anything right now. But which is very important you do, is now take that,
Check
check
it.
it in,
Check it.
check it in at the end of the day. Yeah, I'm gonna stop that.